Welcome back everybody, and in today's tutorial I'm going to be showing you guys 3 different ways how you can add blur to your photos to make them either more dreamy, isolate a subject a little bit more, create natural highlights and diffusion, or just use it however it is that you want. So let's not waste any time and let's jump right into the first one. Actually, hold up. Before we do jump in, I want to say I'm going to show you guys how to do this in Photoshop, and then I'll show you how you can actually do this in Lightroom also if you prefer to use Lightroom. Now let's jump into the video. So our first photo is of this fox. The first method that we're going to do is just an outer rim. So just isolating the subject's face and creating a blur around the rim of our subject. And we're not going to go into a whole lot of detail on everything else I did with this photo to get it to look like that. We are just going to focus on this little bit of blur, which is usually the first layer. And as you can see, this is what it looks like, pretty much cleaning up the face, leaving everything blurry, and then we're going to go into how to get it to look a little bit softer like that. So I'm going to turn off these layers here, and we're going to reset this image. With the image now reset, we're going to go into Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and your radius, set it to the megapixel size of your camera. I shoot on Canon 1DX Mark II, so I have mine set to 21.2. Go ahead and click OK. Now, there's a couple things that you can do here. You can create a mask, go to your brush, which B for brush, and you can set the image to the fox's face like so, and then go ahead and turn your hardness all the way up to 100, and you might have to reset it because when you have it set to soft, it does adjust the size based off of the feather. Then you can go ahead and make sure your brush is set on black, and now you have removed the blur from the face. You can select the mask and you can feather it out a little bit, backslash button to see where you're feathering it, and continue to adjust it to your liking, which would probably be, for me, about 350. And now we can see our before and after. But I want to be a little bit more precise, so I'm going to go ahead and Control Z, and let's go ahead and bring that blur back. Now I want to go ahead and take the pen tool, and we're going to draw around the fox's face. And this is just going to help give a little bit more of an accurate this is going to give us more control over what it is that we are blurring out and what we want to keep in focus. And of course you can sit here and take as much time as you want. Now you can see I gave up doing that because this is a tutorial. So go ahead and click Paths, and then you're going to do this little walking ants, and now you have a selection. Minimize that, and then you can just click your mask, makes the selection, Control I to invert it. Now we have our selection made, and just like before, clicking the mask, opening up your properties, and we're going to go ahead and set this to 350. And now we can see it's just a little bit more accurate. And then we're going to go ahead and go back to our layers. And what I like to do, because normally you don't have heavy amounts of blur in the blacks and in the shadows and a little bit of the midtones, so I like to open up layer styles and just remove it completely from the blacks and remove it all the way up to about the middle of the midtones. And then I like to drop my fill to anywhere between 15 and 30, just depending. And now you have a nice soft blur around the edge, drawing a lot more focus to your fox, leaving you with an end result looking something like this. The second way that we're going to add blur is through highlight control. So we have our image here, a shot of Mingo Falls in North Carolina. We're gonna go to select and color range, and we're gonna drop this down to highlights. Now you have your range. The higher it is, the less highlights you're gonna get. The darker on the scale, you can see brighter, and we're just gonna work our way down. I already have mine preset to 190 because I mostly just want a little bit of the trees and the falls themselves. So I might actually even drop this down to 150, picking up some of the trees. Fuzziness is just, works as a spread, so we can actually bring this up to 50 as well. And now we can see in our preview here what is actually being selected. Go ahead and hit OK, and you have all this zebra is all the highlights that have been selected. We're gonna go ahead and hit Control J to put that entire selection on a new layer. Filter, blur, Gaussian blur, keeping it at 21.2. And here I like to go and change the blending mode somewhere between lighten and soft light, just depending on the intensity that we're going for, whether or not we want it to affect colors and things like that. I'm probably gonna stick with something like, let's go with overlay, and we can see the big difference it makes there. And then I like to go into image, adjustments, brightness and contrast, and we'll just add 20, go ahead and hit OK. And now we can really see a big difference, increasing a little bit of the saturation near the highlights and everything. And we're gonna do the same thing. So we're gonna open up the layer styles here, and we're going to remove it from the blacks and then draw it out to just before the highlights and the extreme whites. So again, you can see it dulled it just a little bit, and then we're gonna go ahead and drop our fill. Again, between that 15 and 30 range, you can put it at 15 and you can increase it to 30, and you can kind of see which one you like more. Highlights are naturally blurry, right? We see highlights with a natural kind of haze to them. So that is why we're adding these natural highlights back, so that around the highlighted areas of our image, it kind of blends the colors together and it makes a more three-dimensional or textured photo for our end result. So I think I'm gonna put this one back at 20 just for the sake of the tutorial. I'm not gonna play around with it too much. And this is our before and after here. So I'll zoom in. Here's our before, here's our after, and you can see, especially right in this area here, just blending everything a little bit more. Especially you can see it along the rocks here where you can see through the water, just making those highlights kind of jump out, drawing initially more attention to the waterfall itself. Now for a third option here. So this option, I'm sure a lot of people have talked about it. You might have heard this option before. It's very similar to the first one and the second one that we did, but it's more along the lines of an Orton effect. So the Orton effect was actually made by Michael Orton in the 1980s. That's when it became very popular, where he added a soft glow to his images, mainly in the highlights, just to blend the colors together to make not so much of a saturated or chiseled look. It kind of helps reduce a lot of the post-processing sharpness that is added in photos nowadays. Again, just making them a little bit more natural, and that's what we're gonna do with this elk photo here. So you can see this is the before photo for the elk, and this is kind of what we're going for here. You can see how soft everything kind of is around the antlers where the highlights are very strong, in the water here where the highlights are very strong, and in the back of the trees of the photo where, again, the sun's shining through and all those bright, fresh leaves are reflecting the highlights. Again, you can see in the shadows on him on the underside of the elk and in the darker parts of the water at the bottom of the photo, it's been reduced because we just want to draw attention to the highlights. Now this is a little bit more of an intense Orton effect because I wanted it to seem really dreamy and really make the elk stand out from the highlighted portion of the water, as well as the background, because you can see the antlers kind of blend into the tree and I didn't want him to get lost in that. So creating that separation by making it a little bit more blurry, a little bit more dreamy, was the choice that I went for here. So now, how are we gonna do this? We're going to create a new copy of our background, and then we're gonna go ahead and go filter, blur, Gaussian blur, radius 21.2, and then we're going to put a layer mask on, and this we're going to create a soft brush going right over our elk, and we're make sure your brush is set to black, and we're gonna just paint it right on there. And you can see the most control part, or the heaviest part that it's reduced, the blur is right here. So I want to increase that a little bit more to make sure that he's pretty much all blurred out, or all the blur is off of him. And then I'm gonna go through and actually kind of bring some of this back, because I want those highlights to still be blurry. And then I'm gonna go into his face, switch our brush back to black, and I want him to be nice and sharp. Okay, now I'm gonna drop this to about 20, and I'm going to hit Control J, creating a copy of that. And now we're going to draw an even bigger, whoop. And now we're gonna remove even more. And this is just gonna help with a little bit of blending. Make sure that you click back to your layer, and I'll give it 1, and then I'll probably drop my flow down to 50, give it another 1, drop my flow down to 20, give it another 1, and now you can see the area that we're really removing here. Put my flow back up to there, and then I'm going to increase my fill to maybe 30 to 35. And now we can see the before and the after. And you can really see the difference in the background here and all along the antlers. Just adding a lot more depth. And of course, we're gonna go in and open up our layer styles, and we're gonna remove it from the blacks, because we don't want blur in the blacks. We still want this to look somewhat natural. Bringing those up, and then for the heavier one, we're gonna just drag that all the way that way. And now it's gonna be a lot softer, and there we have it. Now let's hop into Lightroom and let me show you guys how you can do essentially the same thing, just with a lot less control, in my opinion, even with all the new Lightroom updates. So we are back at our Fox. Let's go ahead and go to Develop, and we're going to go to Masks. And this is going to be just a radial mask. So go ahead and draw your circle. Put it over the fox's face here. And then go ahead, and what I like to do is just play with the exposure. Okay, so we got to invert it, reset your exposure, and then I like to decrease my contrast, increase my highlights, drop my shadows down a little bit, and then drop your texture, especially on an animal like this where you have a lot of fur, and there's a lot of texture going on in that fur. We want to soften all that. And then clarity, I usually keep it around whatever my texture is, about half of that. And then dehaze, I'll usually just do just under 10. And we can see already what we got going on here. So let's see. Feather, I'm probably gonna decrease my feather a little bit. And we'll put it somewhere right there. And I'm gonna actually increase the size of this a little bit. We'll do something like that. And now we'll get rid of our overlay. And let's go ahead and get rid of that. zoom in, go back, and you can really see the before and after on their ears. Now on this mask, you can do something very similar to what we did in the layer styles. If you hit subtract and do a luminance range here, you have this luminance range bar, and you can actually remove it from your shadows, as you see here. But again, it's not as ideal as what you would get in Photoshop, in my opinion. And that's essentially how you would do exactly the same thing that we did in Photoshop in Lightroom. And you can apply the same Orton effect, adjusting the highlights, all with using either a brush tool or the radial brush tool, or the radial tool, whatever it's called. If we went ahead and deleted this mask and we did a brush mask, you can just simply adjust the feather the way that you want and dab on the highlighted areas of your highlights and go ahead and adjust them that way if you wanted a more controlled, isolated highlight in your particular photo. Then go ahead and adjust your highlights, your shadows, texture, clarity, and dehaze. And you can even play around with the sharpness, but I don't really play around with the sharpness too much. That's just not the way that I do it, but I'm like with any of these tools, there's a million ways that you can do these things. And if you're looking for the secret on how to get crisp photos, go ahead and check out this video next.